My name is Tori Weston, and for the last 9 years I've made my living catching people who steal with a pen instead of a gun. Forensic accounting isn't glamorous. It's spreadsheets at midnight and depositions that smell like burned coffee. But I'm good at it in a way that matters. I don't miss things. So when my husband's younger brother reached into my work bag at 2 in the morning and helped himself to $7,800 worth of chances he thought he deserved, he made the same miscalculation most thieves make. He thought the person sleeping upstairs was someone he already knew. He was wrong about that. By the time my phone started screaming fraud alerts at 6:15 in the morning, the money had moved through 3 transactions and a gambling platform I'd never heard of. I sat on the edge of our bed in Indianapolis, still in my sleep shirt, scrolling through charges the way I scroll through audit findings. Calmly, twice, because your hands need something to do when your brain is already running ahead of them. 2:31 a.m. Online gambling site. 3:203 a.m. Electronics pickup order. Gaming headset, 2 controllers, a monitor. 2,147 a.m. Sports betting app opening deposit. $2,400. $7,700. Round numbers are always interesting to me. People who steal in round numbers are either sloppy or they think they're being clean. Either way, they're wrong. Let me back up. Because the thing about that morning isn't just what happened, it's how long the ground had been shifting before I noticed it was moving. I married Eli Hartley 14 months before that night. He's 33, runs a small landscaping company he built from his truck and a string trimmer, and he has the kind of patience with people that I've always envied and occasionally resented. He grew up in the kind of family that does everything together and never once asks whether you want to. Sunday dinners at his father's house. Birthday calls that run an hour. A group chat that doesn't sleep. His father, Gordon, is 63 and spent 31 years with the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department, retiring as a lieutenant. He still walks into a room like he owns the building codes. He carves meat at the head of every table he sits at, including tables that aren't his. And he says grace in a voice that leaves no room for amendment. Eli's brother Beckett is 34, divorced 2 years back. No kids. He'd been a shift supervisor at a bottling plant until the plant cut its workforce in February, and by the time summer arrived, he was carrying gambling debts he'd built quietly since before the layoff, and a landlord who had stopped accepting explanations. Eli asked me on a Wednesday evening, dish towel in his hands, voice pitched low. 8 weeks, he said, just until Beckett finds his footing. I said yes. I want that on the record. I said yes, because Eli's face when he asked looked like a man requesting something he wasn't sure he had the right to want, and I loved him, and because I believed 8 weeks was 8 weeks. Beckett moved into our guest room the first week of June. By the second week, a 20 I'd left in my jacket pocket was gone. By the third week, a bottle of whiskey I'd been saving for our anniversary was 2/3 empty. I noticed because noticing is my whole job. I told Eli quietly at the kitchen counter. He rubbed his jaw and said maybe he'd opened it and forgotten. He hadn't. He knew he hadn't. I watched something familiar close behind his eyes, some old shutter coming down, and I let it go. I wrote the missing 20 in my notebook. Habit. I document everything. I just didn't think I'd ever need the file. My work bag lives on a hook by the kitchen door. Has lived there for 2 years, since Eli hung that hook on a Saturday morning and said it'd keep me from hunting for my keys. I use that bag every morning at 6:10 when I leave for the office. Inside it, my laptop, my badge, my notebook, and my business card. The debit card linked to the joint operating account for Weston and Park Forensic Services, the firm I've co-owned for 4 years with my business partner Nadine. I want to say something directly, because people always ask, why leave the card there? And the answer is the same answer every woman has to give for every ordinary thing she does in her own home. I had been putting that bag on that hook for 2 years. I'd had a guest for 3 weeks. A person who walks through your house at 2 in the morning and takes your card out of your bag isn't a risk you plan for the same way you plan for a storm. You plan for storms. You don't plan for people you invited inside. The Friday night it happened, Eli was 3 hours south in Bloomington for a client dinner. I went to bed at 10:30. Around 2 I surfaced halfway out of sleep, a sound from downstairs, something soft moving across the hardwood, I thought. Beckett's getting water. I rolled over. That's the moment I've replayed most, and I've made my peace with it, because a woman who can't sleep in her own house has already lost something bigger than money. At 6:15, my alarm went off, and my phone was already full of alerts that had been stacking since 2:31. I sat there a moment after I finished the math. Then I did what I do at the beginning of every fraud case. I got very still and started keeping track. I called the bank before I brushed my teeth. Locked the card, opened a dispute, asked for details in the order that details matter. The gambling platform had a username attached to the account that I recognized. The electronics pickup was under a name and a cell number I'd dialed 100 times. The sports betting deposit had a device fingerprint that any forensic analyst worth their license could trace back in an afternoon. Then I went downstairs. Beckett was in my kitchen, making coffee in the French press I'd asked him twice not to use, wearing a new hoodie with the price tag still tucked inside the collar. He looked up when I walked in. "Morning. Coffee's almost ready." I opened my work bag. The card was there. But it had been returned to the wrong slot, facing backwards, the way you slide something back when your heart is running and you can't see straight. I set my phone on the counter, fraud alerts up, and said, "We need to talk about last night." His face did something I've seen in depositions. It didn't fall, it pivoted. "You got hacked?" My buddy at work had his whole account cleaned out. It's everywhere right now. "The gambling site has your username," I said. "The electronics order is in your name for pickup 12 minutes from here. Your cell number is attached to the account." He looked at the counter, looked at the sleeve of the new hoodie, said, "I was going to put it back before you noticed." That was the plan. I asked him how, with no job and no income, and he waved the question to the side like it was a nuisance. Then he said, "I had a system, a real one. I just needed one good run and I'd have doubled it and paid it back before the statement even closed." I have heard some version of that sentence from dozens of people over 9 years. Every single one of them believed it when they said it. That's the part that never gets easier. Eli got home at noon and went the color of old chalk. Then he called his father. Gordon arrived within the hour in a quarter zip and dress slacks, and he sat down at my kitchen table the way men like Gordon always sit, like the chair had been expecting him. He listened to me for approximately 40 seconds. Then he raised one hand, steady, the way a man raises a hand when he's decided the conversation has already gone on too long, and said the sentence I would hear for the next 6 weeks. He wouldn't steal from his own family. I raised him better than that. Not a question. Not a glance at the bank statements open on my laptop. He said it the way you say something you've decided to make true by repeating it, and around my kitchen, the temperature dropped. Eli sat down. Not next to me. I noted that with the part of my brain that doesn't go off shift. He sat at the middle of the table, equidistant, a man positioning himself between two countries without planting a flag in either one. I had never seen my husband sit like that. He was 33 years old and he sat like a teenager, called to the principal's office, shoulders straight, hands flat on the wood. Gordon's voice went warm next, which scared me more than when it was firm. He said families handle things inside the family. He said banks don't understand in context. He said if I let him handle it in his own way, he'd make sure every dollar came back to me personally, out of Beckett's own pocket, and he'd stand behind that promise with his own name. He said it the way a man offers to carry something heavy for you, making it seem like the gracious thing would be to let him. I told him the card was already locked and the dispute already filed. That this is simply what you do when charges appear on your account in the night. The way you call a plumber when you find water on the floor. Something moved across Gordon's face. Not guilt. I'd have recognized guilt. It was the expressions of a man who realizes the jurisdiction has slipped out from under him. You filed, he said quiet, before you called me. And there it was. In his arithmetic, the theft was weather, an inconvenience, wind and rain, something a family endures together. My phone call was a decision, and decisions have names attached to them. What none of them understood yet, what I hadn't fully said aloud, was that this particular decision had never been mine alone to make. Monday morning at 8:40, I was at my desk when Nadine walked in and closed the door behind her. Nadine Park is my business partner, the other name on the debit card, and the co-owner of 4 years of both our working lives. She is precise and careful, and she had already received the bank's fraud alert on her own phone over the weekend. She had already called counsel. She sat down across from me and said my name. Just that, the way a partner says a name when she's been preparing what comes next. The account is joint, she said. The bank's fraud protocol requires both cardholders to sign a joint affidavit of unauthorized use. Together, we have 10 business days from the flag date. She looked at me steadily. I'm not letting $700 of our operating money disappear into someone's account and calling it a family matter. I'm sorry, I know this is hard. But I'm filing. I held my coffee for a moment and then I said, I know. Because I did. Because that's what it means to build something with another person. Some things stop belonging to you alone, and the business was one of them. I drove home the long way that evening, over the White River Bridge, and I thought about the fact that Gordon believed he was protecting his son from a system that had once humiliated his family. He wasn't. He was asking me to feed myself to that system in Beckett's place, and he would never understand why that wasn't the same thing as love. The family arrived by phone in waves, like weather moving in from different directions. Eli's aunt called first, a sweet woman, genuinely sweet, and said, Honey, families don't do this to each other. I asked her gently whether she meant the stealing or the reporting, and she went quiet in a way that told me she'd never once placed those two things on the same shelf. A woman from Gordon's church found me on social medias and wrote that she was praying for our family in this season of confusion. That's church language for, we've heard, and we've chosen. Cousins sent Eli paragraphs. Not one person, in 6 weeks, as far as I could learn, called Beckett and asked him why. Every call came to me, because in their physics, I was the variable. Beckett gambling was like winter, nobody's fault, something to be endured. Me reporting it was a choice, and choices have owners. The worst one was quiet. At Sunday dinner, yes, we still went. Eli white-knuckled the entire drive. Gordon stood to say grace and added at the end, eyes closed. Lord, we know Margaret is watching over this family. She always knew how to hold us together. His late wife, gone 5 years. He never said my name, and he never said Beckett's. He just laid that good woman's memory on the table like a fourth document he wanted me to sign. I recognized the play. I've spent 9 years studying how people manage narratives when the facts stop cooperating. When the evidence goes against you, you don't fight the evidence. You reframe the question as one about loyalty, and everyone at that table passed the potatoes and looked at me like I was the one holding something sharp. Wednesday evening, Gordon came to our house without calling and sat down at my kitchen table the way he always sat at tables that weren't his. He set a long envelope down, square, the way men of his generation present serious things. Inside was a cashier's check for $7,700, and beneath it a typed page. I read the page twice. It was a statement declaring that Beckett Hartley was an authorized user of the card in question, that all purchases had been made with the full knowledge of both account holders, and that no unauthorized use had occurred. There was a signature line for me and a signature line for Nadine. He'd had a lawyer draft it. That was the detail that landed the hardest. He had thought it through carefully enough to pay someone to write it, which meant he'd mapped every angle of the problem and concluded this was the solution, which meant he'd never once considered the angle where I tell the truth. He told me, sign it. The bank closes the case, the firm's account is restored, Beckett pays him back over time, and the family goes back to being a family. I told him the truth, plainly. The account had 2 names on it. I couldn't sign something that also required Nadine's signature without her agreement. And signing a false statement of authorized use to a federally insured bank was a thing that had a name in federal statute and a sentencing range. And it would also make me personally liable for the full balance, since the firm's policy prohibits personal card sharing, and it would give Nadine legal grounds to dissolve the partnership. Gordon looked at me the way a man looks at something in a language he's decided not to learn. Then tell your partner you gave him permission, he said. Simple as that. Like the obvious solution had been sitting there all along and I'd simply failed to see it. I slid the check back across the table, watched his hand close over it, slow, and understood in that moment that I hadn't refused money. I had refused a citizenship, and the price of that citizenship I now knew was paid weekly, indefinitely, in whatever silence the family needed that particular Sunday. 3 days later, Gordon called me directly. Not Eli, me. His voice was the warmest I had ever heard it, which is exactly how I knew to sit down before I kept listening. He said he respected what Nadine and I had built together. He said he understood the position I was in. Then he said memories are funny things. That his neighbor remembered seeing me hand my card to Beckett at a lunch last spring. That Eli's cousin remembered me saying once that Beckett could charge things to my account any time he needed while I was traveling. Under oath, he said, people remember what their family needs them to remember. That's not lying, that's love. And the floor tilted. Because there was one grain in it that was true, and he knew it. Back in April, I'd paid for a team lunch on the business card. Client adjacent, Nadine said to run it through the firm. Beckett had been at that lunch. I'd handed the card to the server in front of him. Put that single fact in front of an arbitration panel with 4 warm family witnesses, and watched the word unauthorized start to lose its footing. I'm not threatening you, Gordon said, soft as a weather forecast. I'm just telling you the weather. He hung up. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone and understanding that I had just heard the entire machine say its own name out loud for the first and only time. That was the night I nearly came undone. Eli was asleep. The house was dark and quiet. I sat at the kitchen table at 1 a.m, with the joint affidavit in front of me and my father's letter opener beside it. A brass thing he used every day at the accounting firm where he worked for 22 years. The firm that, in 2003, asked him to sign a false expense report because the alternative was messy for them, and he signed it because he wanted to believe they were his people. And he lost his CPA license at 54 and never recovered it. He died at 57, 3 years later, and never worked a single day in his field again. I sat there and built the case for signing Gordon's paper. Sign it and the marriage gets easier. Sign it and Sunday dinner stays warm. Sign it and Nadine's firm stays clean, protected from all of this. All it costs is one line and a version of events I don't believe. And hadn't I been built for exactly that trade? I had watched my father do it. I had promised myself I never would, and here I was at 1 a.m, pen within reach, hand beginning to move. And then a floorboard creaked. Beckett. In the kitchen doorway in an undershirt, holding a glass. He looked at the papers, looked at me, and sat down across the table without being asked. I know I messed up, he said. I waited. I had a system. A real one. It was working until this one run. I just needed to get back even and then I was done. He looked at the table. You know what it's like to be in this family and be the one who can't hold it together? Dad's whole identity is fixing things. Eli built something from scratch, and I'm the little brother sleeping in someone else's guest room at 34. He looked up. I wasn't stealing from you. I was borrowing from a system that could absorb it. 9 years of fraud work, and I have heard every shape of that sentence. The borrowing, the system, the plan that made the taking make sense while you were doing it. I asked him if he was sorry. He looked at the papers on the table. He said, "I'll pay it back." Not sorry, I'll pay it back. There is a difference, and people who know the difference understand why it matters. I walked him back to the guest room door. Then I stood alone in the hallway in the dark and heard my own voice from 2 hours earlier, from the case I'd been carefully building for Gordon's paper. My father signed what they asked him to sign, I thought. 2 years later, they let him go anyway. The license never came back. The quiet he bought was never once cheaper than the truth would have been. I went back to the kitchen. I folded Gordon's paper and put it in its envelope. Then I read the joint affidavit one more time. Plain language. I did not authorize. I did not consent. I understand this statement may be used in legal proceedings. I texted Nadine at 1:40 in the morning. I'm signing in the morning. Whatever comes next, we tell the truth together. She texted back one word, good. The following Sunday, Gordon held a family dinner. He called it that. I called it what it was, a hearing he had organized, with a venue he controlled, witnesses he'd selected, and a referee he trusted. 12 people. Eli's aunt, 3 cousins, a neighbor couple from his church, and Pastor Bill, who had married Gordon and his second wife 8 years ago and appeared to serve as his character witness in all domestic proceedings. Gordon's late wife's china was out, the set that surfaced only at Easter and at funerals. My place card sat at Gordon's left hand. For 14 months I had been at the far end near the serving trays. The week he needed my signature, I was promoted. Gordon said grace. Pastor Bill added a word about the foolishness of inviting institutions into the sacred space of family. Everyone murmured amen. Beckett studied the tablecloth. Gordon stood to carve, and he was magnificent in the way that men who have practiced authority for 30 years are magnificent. Steady hands, silver at the temples, a voice built for rooms that need quieting. He said, "The world out there will cheat you and sell you for a discount." He said, "Family is the only court that issues real mercy." He looked around the table at 12 people who had grown up believing him, and then he delivered it one final time. Soft and certain as a gavel wrapped in good cloth. He wouldn't steal from his own family. I raised him better than that. 12 faces turned toward me. I opened my bag. Gordon's entire bearing shifted, became warm, expansive, the posture of a man who believes the room has finally turned in his direction. He called me daughter. First time he had ever used the word, and he spent it in front of witnesses like a chip he'd been saving for exactly the right hand. He said, "Sign it, and the firm is made whole today, every dollar." Beckett answers to him for the rest, between them and God. He paused and let the silence do what silence does at a table full of people who want to believe the story that ends cleanly. Then he said, soft as a scripture, "And you won't be Eli's wife who works downtown anymore. You'll be ours, full stop. That's what family means." The book closes. The silence after that was complete. Even the candles seemed to hold still. I reached into my bag. What I brought out was not Gordon's envelope. I unfolded the joint affidavit. Nadine's signature already on the left line, mine fresh on the right, dated the day before, and I smoothed it flat on the good tablecloth. I said, "Before anyone eats, I want to say some true things one time. Nobody has to respond. Gordon, especially, I would rather you just listened." He was still standing. He sat down slowly. "In 1989, I said, your brother Russ was arrested for check fraud. He went to county for 4 months. Your family lost the house you'd grown up in. You were 28, you'd just made sergeant, and you stood in your uniform in that booking room and felt every eye in the building on you. And you spent the next 31 years making sure no Hartley would ever sit across a desk like that again." Gordon's jaw went to stone. "I understand that," I said. "I do. But Gordon, look at what it built." I looked at Eli and he held very still. Your younger son borrowed money from a friend at 16 to cover Beckett's juvenile citation that got expunged before he was 18. There was a bookie complaint in 2019 that you settled out of your own retirement account. A banking situation in 2021 that you handled with a phone call to someone who owed you. Every consequence and ever supposed to survive. You caught it before it landed. You caught it before it could teach him a single thing. Beckett's eyes came up from the tablecloth. So at 2 in the morning, he walked through my house and put his hand in my work bag. And Gordon, he wasn't scared. That's what should keep you awake. In 34 years, not one thing had ever stayed. He believed in the net the same way a child believes in the floor. Because you built it so well, he never once had to test it. I looked at the affidavit on the tablecloth. You wanted to protect your son from a system that humiliated your family once a long time ago. I understand that. But the system didn't take $7,700 out of my business partner's operating account. Your son did. And the most loving thing, the truest thing, anyone has ever done for Beckett Hartley is to let him live in a world where that has a shape and a weight and a consequence that doesn't disappear. I can't sign your paper. I wanted a place at this table. I'll be honest about that. I wanted it more than most of you ever noticed, and the timing of my seat assignment tonight was not lost on me. But the card Beckett took didn't belong to me alone. It belongs to a business and a partnership and another woman's 9 years of work, and the truth about it was never mine to trade. Not for a check, not even for a seat at Gordon's left hand. I looked around the table. This has already been filed. Nadine's signature and mine, submitted Friday morning. I'm telling you now, because you deserve to hear it from me, in this room, rather than from somewhere else. Because I've spent 9 years making sure records are honest, and I am not starting to compromise that with my own. The room made a sound I will remember. Not a gasp. Something quieter and worse, the sound of a room full of people understanding something at once, and wishing they didn't have to. Gordon rose from his chair. His hands, steady on the carving knife all evening, had begun to shake. "Then you don't belong here," he said, and his voice broke in the middle of it. The first fracture I had ever heard in that man. "You were never going to belong here." Chairs scraped back. Someone's fork rang against china. Beckett stood without a word and moved toward the door. The cousins found reasons to look at their phones and then found their coats. I folded the affidavit, capped my pen, and walked the length of that dining room, past the sideboard, past the late wife's empty chair at the far end of the table. 12 steps that had taken 6 weeks to reach, or maybe my whole adult life. Behind Yanzi in that silence, one more chair slid back. And Eli said to the room and to no one, "I've got her coat." It was raining outside. The small kind that doesn't ask anything of you. Eli drove. Neither of us touched the radio. We were most of the way home, stopped at a light on Meridian Street, wipers keeping slow time, when he finally spoke. "My whole life," he said, "that house has been the place where things got explained to me. What I owed, how to carry it, what loyalty looked like exactly." The light changed. He didn't move. "You were the first person who never needed to explain me to myself." A car behind us tapped its horn politely. He raised a hand in the mirror and drove on. I cried the quiet way, not the kind that performs itself. Just water running long past due. "Here is how it's settled, because you've earned the accounting." The prosecutor's office offered Beckett a deferred prosecution agreement. He admitted to unauthorized use of a financial instrument, entered a restitution plan for the full amount, and completed 80 hours of community service at a food bank on the east side of the city. No conviction on his record if he completes the terms. As of this telling, he has. Every week, on time. He found work with a landscaping crew, not Eli's, a different one, and that was his own decision, and I think it was the right one. He's held the job for 5 months. Nadine said, that's the first time she's heard of him keeping anything that long, and Nadine knows people, so I take that seriously. The firm was made whole by the bank. Nadine framed the resolution letter and put it in our break room. She is exactly that kind of person, and I am grateful for her every single day. Gordon has not called. The family story, as it reaches us through Eli's aunt, is that the wife from downtown burned everything down over money she would have gotten back anyway. He returned our Christmas card with a single line drawn through the address. That is the truth about dismantling a system that has run for decades. It doesn't thank you for it. It doesn't break cleanly. It simply loses its reach into your particular house. And one day you realize you have stopped checking where the edge of its reach ends, because you no longer live anywhere near it. Eli started seeing a therapist on Tuesday evenings. He keeps something in his truck's cup holder, a receipt from when he was 15, in Beckett's handwriting, $40 borrowed, will repay. He's carried it in a box since boyhood. He looks at it some mornings when he's sitting in the driveway before he comes inside. I asked him once what it was for. He said, "So I remember what quiet used to cost." 4 months after the dinner, on a Saturday morning in early spring, Beckett came to our door. Alone, no car in the driveway, walked from the bus stop at the corner. He stood on the porch and held out an envelope. Inside was a personal check drawn on his own account, from his own wages at the landscaping company, made out to Weston Park. It was not the full amount. It didn't need to be. It was the first installment. His name on the check, his account, his wages. "Don't tell Dad," he said. I told him I wouldn't. He nodded and walked back down the driveway, and I stood in the door watching him go. Understanding that I had just seen a 34-year-old man do something he had never done once in his life. Begin. My work bag still hangs on the hook by the kitchen door. Eli's hook, his idea, a Saturday morning 2 years ago. I grab it every morning at 6:10. I sleep the whole night through, in my own house, in my own bed, and I do not listen to the sounds the floors make. I used to believe that keeping the peace was the same as keeping the family. I know the difference now. You cannot protect someone from consequences without protecting them from becoming someone who can survive them. And the most expensive kindness I ever showed the Hartley family was finally, quietly, letting the price be real. One card, one joint affidavit, a signature that cost me a Sunday dinner and gave me back the ground under my feet. If you've ever been the person who pays so the room stays warm, you know the bill I'm describing. You know it resets every single week. If this story found you at the right moment, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Subscribe to Peaceful Drama Stories because quiet women carry the loudest truths. And I'll see you in the next one.